Well, here I am, everybody. I'm still alive. I'm not dead yet. I've gone quite a while without making a video, as you've noticed. I think the last time I uploaded was on, New Year's Day, and it's currently the 13th of January, Friday the 13th, at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. So I wanted to come on here, first of all, and say, hi, how y'all doing? The reason I haven't been on here is kind of stupid, but long story short, I have had some life stuff going on. A lot of stuff has happened, both good and bad, but mostly bad. Had a few good things. What else? I don't know. I just really... This is going to sound selfish. I haven't had the will to upload, and I'm going to be honest with you here. In those 2 weeks it's been since I haven't hit upload, do you know how much less anxiety I have felt than normal just to not have to worry and answer to getting videos out? And I think I was still responding to questions and stuff, but it was just a night and day difference. But obviously I don't want that to go on forever, so I'm coming on here with a story. First of all, Jeff Beck passed away on the January 10th. I believe he was born in 1934, died this year. And also, just a little later after this was filmed, it was announced that Robbie Bachman died. What the hell is going on? Jeff Beck, he was 78. Then we had Elvis Presley's daughter, Lisa. She was 54. And Robbie Bachman. No! Of all the people it could have been, it was Robbie Bachman. No! BTO was supposed to be immortal. It was one of the few bands that was supposed to be, and I'm sad. I'm genuinely sad about that. I didn't make a post about it, didn't record anything, but I'd like to put it out there right now. Rest in peace, Jeff Beck. I believe Rolling Stones, number 5. I want to say number 5 greatest guitarist of all time. I have the magazine over there, I could just look. But I want to get to the story. So, many of you all know I was looking for a new car, preferably something trucky, like a trucky SUV. And I was looking at Chevy Trailblazers, 2002 to 2009, because they're truck-based, but they're not trucks. They're pretty good size. You see a lot of them on the road still. They're pretty reliable, relative. And they get horrible gas mileage. So, what's not to like? Long story short, if you really want to know, I think when they were new, they were rated for like 15 city, 21 highway, which, keep in mind, this is an inline 6-cylinder engine, but that's not really. I mean, if you get 13 miles per gallon in the city, you're doing pretty good, and if you get 18 on the highway, you're doing pretty good. They are gas hogs. They are, like, literally worse than Suburbans on gas. It's crazy how bad. But anyways, so last month, December, I had saved a listing on Facebook Marketplace for a 2008 Chevy Trailblazer LS. It looked a little rough from the pictures, but it wasn't too bad. It looked pretty much like a 2008 Chevy would, and I decided to save it. Now, a couple weeks went by. This is probably November still at this point, actually. It's like a couple weeks went by. I still hadn't seen anything else. I was like, wonder if it's still available. So I shot him a message. He lived in the same town as me, and I agreed to go look at it. So when I got there, I discovered that it's very rusty. Underneath the frame, not severely rusty, but definitely superficial. And the other spot that those tend to get really bad rust is the bottom of the doors, because what it is the plastic around them holds moisture, and then the bottom of the door frame, and I know this because I know and work on Chevy trucks of this era a lot in my shop, but the bottom of the doors just completely rusts away. And this one had it on all 4 doors. Also the tailgate, this one wasn't as bad. So it had a few issues I noticed. It had new tires recently put on it, some Falcon tires, Falcon Wild Peak I think, and the tire pressure light was on. And he was like, oh, I think it's a wheel sensor or something. And I was like, okay, that's a bit concerning. The other thing that was a bit concerning is that I didn't notice this until I drove it, but there was residue on the gauge cluster over the tire pressure light. So I went back and looked in the pictures, and sure enough, guess what was covered with electrical tape? The tire pressure sensor light. Keep in mind that this Trailblazer got new tires the week I went to look at it. Right? He literally said, I have the receipt, I'll show it to you, and it was from like 4 days prior. So what the hell is the light still on for, and why was it on before? It was taped over. Keep in mind, this was a kid probably just out of high school, maybe 19, 20. He wanted something sportier. He was going to sell a Trailblazer. Okay, so I decided to pass on it. It seemed to run okay. It shifted okay. It had some issues cosmetically. The seats were stained. Some stuff on the interior was rattly. Pieces of it, were broken. The mirror was a little loose. The windshield had a nice crack across the top. It was a little rough. Better condition, I would say, than most Trailblazers, because most Trailblazers are driven into the ground and just abused. But worse than I was hoping for. And it had 146,000 miles on it, which is okay. So, goes by, I'm like, I didn't think it was worth it. And another thing, too, is, you know how in Trailblazers they have the button you press to open the glass? Well, I went to press the button on it when I had stopped at the church parking lot to take a picture of the VIN while he wasn't with me. I pressed the button and, oops, the button stuck. And the glass didn't open. So, something's wrong there with the button mechanism. And I looked this up later, and it turns out with the envoys and stuff that it's actually a common problem. So, fast forward to a few days ago. I hadn't found anything else, and I noticed that ad was still up. And I decided to re-message him and say, hey, I gave him a story of I looked at it, found something else, ended up not going through, and it's like, I'm still interested if you're willing to sell. So he goes, okay, perfect. You can get it inspected by your mechanic. You can do whatever you want. He was already flexible on price, which, to be fair, he had it listed way over book. He wanted $5,700 out of this car, which is not what it's worth. It's worth maybe, in this market, maybe $4,500 on a good day with the sun shining and a fresh coat of water and wax. Maybe. Probably more like $3,800. But I gave him the benefit of the doubt, and I decided to arrange a time. I went over to his house. His mom gave me the keys because he wasn't home. And this was my first time. Now, I had driven it in December, obviously, but this was my first time driving it more than around the block and driving it about 10 minutes away to my shop and driving it alone. So I got in, I adjusted the seats. I like the interiors of the Trailblazer. I should put that out there. It's not a well-built interior, but I like the ergonomics of it all. That's really, for me, why I like GM over Ford. I like to make fun of Ford and stuff, but I don't really hate Ford. I just hate some of their interior ergonomics. They've made some good engines and some bad engines, but so has GM. Made some good vehicles, bad vehicles, but so has GM. But Ford's interior ergonomics, up until actually, I would say the past decade, I never was a fan of them. I always liked GM's more. But with that said, I got in, I adjusted everything, started it up, has a quarter tank of gas. I let it sit for a minute, put it in reverse, and I go. Now, it was a little loud, but I think that it was loud in December too. I think something may have been wrong with it. So, one other thing. In December, we looked up the Carfax on it, and I want to get to that. So, I drive it to my shop. I go down the road. It's fine. I do feel a bit of a vibration from the transmission, and I'm like, oh, this isn't good. So I get it there, I get it back. Once it's warmed up, I give it a little punch. When I'm turning onto the 55 mile an hour highway to get to the shop, I give it a punch just to make sure it goes. And it picks up. The 4.2 inline 6 in one of those is actually pretty peppy, even though I'm sure I used a gallon of gas doing that. Quarter tank, whatever. So I get it to the shop. My dad's there with me. We decide to check it in. Now the shop that I'm talking about is 1 minute from my house. And they know me pretty well because they know my car, the Monte Carlo. First thing the guy asked me is, what happened to the Lexus? And that's a long story for another time, but I'm like, yeah, they wouldn't come down on price. It was dealership, screw Champion. But, which for the record, Champion, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram in Waverly, don't go there. But, or if you want to get ripped off, go there. But, and that's the reason I don't deal with dealerships. I hate dealerships with a burning passion. But anyways, back to the story. So I go, yeah, I'm here. I was wondering if you could check my Trailblazer. Now, keep in mind that this shop does free pre-purchase inspections. It's a fucking blessing, I'm going to say, that they do that. It's amazing because the shop that I also go to in Lansing charges $150. I know the owner, but I say, hey, can you squeeze the Trailblazer in? And I don't remember how it got started, but the one other guy goes, oh, that thing? And I go, yeah. And he said, how many miles are on it? And I said, 146. And he said, is it in good shape? And I said, mostly. He said, I wouldn't buy it. I said, he said, how much are they asking? I said, almost $6,000. And he said, I wouldn't do that, man. He looked at me straight in the face and said, I had a Trailblazer for a while, a few cars ago, and I hated it. Everything about it was junky. He said, I replaced the transmission, the transfer case, the gauge cluster, the interior pieces, the sunroof, the windshield, multiple rims, multiple pieces of the engine. He goes, I would not buy one, man. He said they're horrible on gas. And I go, yeah, I've heard they get 12 miles per gallon. And he goes, yeah, if you're lucky. So here's the red flag about this car. And I decided to tell him this. The Carfax, so first of all, the one red flag on the Carfax is that it started life as a rental and then was given to some lady, and then the kid I got it from bought it from the lady. When it was owned by the lady, it was in a small collision. My guess is that they hit a deer with it because the front bumper and the right headlight were both new. And the bumper was also put on crooked like this. But that was the major thing, and I was like, okay, it was an under 30-mile-an-hour crash. It's probably okay. It didn't bust the radiator, didn't crack any of the fans, it didn't break anything in the wheels. So it's like, okay, here's the red flag. Has 146,000 miles on it. It's been through three intake manifolds, which is not a part that normally breaks. Some cars have issues with the intake manifold gaskets, which is what goes around the intake manifold. That's a more common issue, but the intake manifold itself, to have three of them at that mileage, that's really suspicious. And even, I told them that, and the guy goes, oh, he goes, I would run from that. Honestly, I wouldn't even give him $1,000 for that if they were going to sell. He said, I personally, and this is me talking to you, I would run away from that car as fast as you can. And the other red flag is it's not like they were done at intervals, like one was at 30,000 miles, one was at 100,000 miles, and one was at 140,000 miles. No, one was at 70,000, one was at 80,000, and one was at 110,000. So the first one failed at 70,000, which is already kind of suspicious because that's not a part that's supposed to fail. Then the replacement one failed not even a year later practically, and then 30,000, 40,000 miles later, that one failed. And I took my dad outside after we left the shop, and I started it, and I revved it up. I didn't bounce it off the limiter, but I gave it a good rev, and when it came back down, you could hear a coming from the exhaust. So the third intake manifold was failing. What is going on with this thing? Something is seriously wrong with the foundation of that car. Okay. So, long story short, I left the mechanic. He goes, honestly, man, I wouldn't even get the car looking. I said I would run from it. And I told him, I was like, oh, yeah, they're just hard to find. He goes, trust me, find a different one. He said, if you buy that one, you're probably going to be back here in about a month owing me about $2,000. And I said, fair enough. He said, well, what are you looking for? And I said, trucky, SUV, Trailblazer, Jeep Grand Cherokee, 4Runner type, Explorer type SUV. He goes, if you want a Jeep, the 2000 to 2006 Grand Cherokees were the best Jeeps ever made pretty much. So I took that with me. He says, if you want a good Jeep, get a 2000 to 2005 actually Jeep Grand Cherokee with the 4-liter inline 6. Still looking for one of those. They're hard to come by. The XJs are good, but they're kind of older now. The ZJ Grand Cherokees were good, but they're also older. Excuse me. I'm not really a Ford guy, but if I had to take an Explorer, I'd take an Explorer. But long story short, I left, okay? And I'm like, well, that was a disappointment. I can't believe he just talked me out of that, but at the end of the day, it's probably a good thing. Well, I think the car probably was listening into me on that conversation, and it went, oh, you're going to do that to me? I'm going to fuck you over. And this is the car talking to me, but it can't talk. It's what it's thinking. So I start driving. It's driving. I pull up to a stoplight. Now, I will say, I had thought I told you I thought I felt like a jittering in the transmission when I would slow down. Vibration almost. When I stopped at, not the first stoplight, but the second stoplight, the car stalled. It was in drive, I came to a stop, and just as I stopped, it did the vibration, then it boop, 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 boop. And out she goes. And I had the windows up, so it was pretty quiet, but the tachometer just went bloop. And I was like, uh-oh. So I shove it in neutral real quick, I flick the key, and it starts up again, but I'm like, that's not good. So I proceed to sort of do this with it, trying to move up at the stoplight without rear-ending the car in front of me, and I was like, uh-oh, that's not good. And it wasn't out of gas either. It had a quarter tank if the gauge was reading right. So the jittering I felt wasn't the transmission, it was the engine trying not to stall. And I hadn't noticed the RPMs dropping because it went from running to it really stalled pretty suddenly. And I think it was gonna stall earlier, but I didn't give it enough time to fully stop. So when I did that, it just died. And so at that point I was like, okay, something is seriously wrong with this car. Something very major is wrong with this car. Started up, and I get to the next stoplight, and I'm like, please God, don't stop. Please keep running. I stop. Sure enough, it stays running. I get it back to her house, and I tell her, say, hey, so on the way back from my mechanics, it stalled at every red light. And she goes, oh, really? Is it out of gas? And I was like, no, it has a quarter of a tank. And she goes, really? I mean, what? I've never seen that. And I was like, yeah, I didn't do anything to it. I promise you, I did not do anything. I did not mess with anything, and it just cut off at every red light. She's like, oh, I didn't know if it was doing that. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know if your son told you, but yeah. She's like, did you even take it to the mechanic? And I said, no. As soon as it did it the first time, we flipped around and came back here. And she's like, oh, well, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that it did that. And I was like, really? So I gave the keys back, shook her hand, said have a good day, and basically said, I'm not really interested if I have to shit money onto it immediately, because you can't have a car that stalls at every red light. You just can't. It's not safe. You can't have a car that just stalls. So basically at that point I walked away and I said, I may be sad now, but I dodged a bullet. You don't know how big the bullet I dodged was. So the moral of the story is, just because you see a good-looking car does not mean it's a good car. And I think most people know that. But I wanted to share my experience. Ha 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 ha, I hijacked a Trailblazer. Not mine, though. She's kind of grumpy in the morning. Basically, I also had a revelation, and this is from being in a shop for the past, since the summer, working on junk cars and stuff. We have a lot more GM vehicles in our shop than anything else, and I think that's because we're in Mason, Michigan, which is south of Lansing, which is GM capital. So what I realized is that after about the 90s, GM vehicles, for the most part, are still built engine and transmission wise, maybe not transmission for all 60, but engine wise are still built pretty well. The problem was, after about the turn of the century, GM started cheapening the way they built the cars. Really, really bad. Go look at a Cat Eye Silverado. It's a great truck and it'll last you a long time, but God forbid if that interior holds up, because good Lord, the interiors on the GM T800 platform have got to be some of the cheapest, worst made car interiors ever. I don't even think a Ford of that era would be that bad, and Fords are not particularly good either. But not even the GM T800s, the cars, like we have a Buick Century in our shop, it's falling apart. We have a Cobalt in our shop, good Lord, it's falling apart. Oh, what else? Oh, now I gotta think. We have a Traverse in our shop. It's fine, but it's also, I don't know how to explain it. It's newer-ish. But what I'm saying is that GM still built good engines for the most part. You know, you have the 3800, which is a pretty good engine. You have the LS engines, the 5.3, the 6.0, the 4.8. They're all pretty good. You have the 4.2 inline 6 in the Trailblazers, which is pretty good. But the problem is the rest of the car. They don't hold up. If you go anywhere, now I see a lot of Trailblazers on the road because I live in Lansing and this is GM capital, but anytime I see a Trailblazer, it's ratty. I haven't seen a truly nice Trailblazer probably 5 years since I saw a nice one rolling around. They're all ratty, they're all loud, they're all missing wheels, they're all destroyed. They don't last. And part of that is due to owners, obviously, but a Toyota or even a better Chevy would hold up to that. And I say better Chevy because I have a 1995 Chevy, and the interior quality between that and a 2005 Chevy is a night and day difference. You can't even compare the two of them. Now granted, a 1995 Chevy is not exactly the most well-built interior, but I will be damned if it is nearly as bad as a 2000s GM interior. I cannot believe that GM, with all their sense and abilities, looked at the interiors of some of these cars, like the Cobalt, which is, I get it, it's a small car, but the Malibu, the Impala, the Century, the Regal, the Bonneville, the Trailblazer, the Equinox, the Torrent, the trucks, they looked at them and said, yeah, that's good. What more likely happened was the executives went, oh, it looks good, shove them out, get them sold, it looks good. If I had to take a guess, kind of like Chrysler, that's probably what was going on, was there was some involved. But with that said, it's just a night and day difference. A 90s GM product, in my opinion, the 90s GM was really the last long ditch stretch of good, solid American built, not American built, but American, because my car is made in Windsor, but American quality trying to hang on before they started cheapening everything and making everything just so shitty. Because of cost, obviously. You know, my car interior has held up. Yeah, it's got some things that are broken on it, like the center console lid, but the seats have held up. They're not ripped like a truck would be from 2000s or a Regal. The radio knobs haven't fallen off. You can pull them off, but they haven't fallen off. The shift lever spring hasn't broken. The power seats still work. The turn signal lever, the writing has rubbed off, but it still goes up and down. The steering wheel isn't turning or fading. The dashboard isn't miscolored. It's not cracking. The paint isn't even miscolored, which granted, it's been parked in a garage, but even when it was outside, you know, it's from Arizona. The paint, you would think would be bad, but the lights still work. I haven't burned out any bulbs except one marker light. The trunk lid works. The engine still starts. Every single day that I have owned that car, except once, and it was my fault, I have turned the key and the engine has fired up. I really don't think that a 2005 Chevy could say the same. I have a feeling that I would go out to start a 2005 Chevy most days and it might stop and struggle. And it's a real shame because a 1995 car is almost 30 years old, and ideally I wouldn't want to drive around in a 30-year-old car, but if that's what it takes to get quality, you do what you have to do. You know, Toyotas are pretty well built. I don't really love them because I like domestic cars better. It's just my preference, just how I'd rather spend my money. But you can't find nice domestics anymore. And to be honest, other vehicles I was trying to find, a Ford Escape, which I had a revelation about the Ford Escape that makes me not want to buy them anymore, and that was the extreme rust problems that those had, namely the frames separating from the bodies. I've tried looking for Explorers, I've tried looking for Cherokees and Grand Cherokees. My only gripe with a Jeep XJ Cherokee is that for the size, they get horrible fuel economy, they get like 13, and the back seats are tiny, and I know because I have a friend with a 2000, and it's cool, but the back seat is tiny. Looked at Trailblazers, I would prefer something with 3 rows, like a minivan almost. My aunt has a minivan that I could end up with, but it's a piece of junk. It's a Dodge Grand Caravan, and it's currently belongs to my cousin, and until they can get a replacement car, they're not going to do anything with the Caravan. But something with 3 rows. I did look at Traverses, which some people are going to say, oh, those are junk. They're mediocre. They're okay if you take care of them. The problem is most of them aren't taken care of. But that's pretty much what I've tried to look at. But I tell you what, it's hard to do that when I look at my car, which is a Chevy. I go to start it, and every day, like clockwork, engine starts, throw it in gear, and off I go. And I drive to Mason and back every day. That's 12 miles. My commute is 12 miles back and forth, 24 miles total. And it doesn't skip a beat. It just doesn't skip a beat. And it makes it hard for me to want to upgrade, even though my car is impractical and old and, you know, not the best car ever made. It makes it hard to justify an upgrade. Let's say I upgrade to, I don't know, let's pick something. Say I were to upgrade to 2004 Jeep Grand Cherokee. It's probably going to be pretty reliable. But is it going to be as reliable as that Monte Carlo is? Probably not. Even if I upgraded to a Trailblazer, I guarantee you it's not going to be as reliable. Or if a Traverse. The only SUV like that that's pretty comparable would be if I could find an old-style Ford Explorer from like the early 2000s, not after '02, or a, not a Blazer, but a Jeep XJ. That would probably fall in the realm. It's the old, you gotta find something with an old school engine, like what's in my car, the 3100 V6, or the 4-liter inline 6 from Jeep. You gotta find an old school engine. The 4.2 inline 6 is not old school. It's very modern school, actually. But the older school it is, the better it is. Now, granted, my engine has a little less than 100,000 miles on it, but guess what? Doesn't burn any oil, doesn't leak, doesn't drip, doesn't do anything. The intake manifold gaskets could use replacing, but it's a 3100. All engines have their issues. The 3100s happen to go through intake manifold gaskets like I go through hot dogs, which is a lot. So, I'm sorry for ranting. I just wanted to put it all out there and just say some cautionary words. Don't get fooled. Run a Carfax. Always run a Carfax. And always, and I can't stress this enough, always get a pre-purchase inspection. Unless you are actually a mechanic who works in a shop, who knows everything about the car you're going to buy, get one done. Even if you have to pay $100, $150, it's worth it if you buy a car for $7,000 and end up having to put another $5,000 into it. Chevy Traverse. So, at the end of the day, the moral of my story is, number one, you probably shouldn't buy a Chevy Trailblazer. Which, if you're looking to buy a Trailblazer now, to daily drive, let me tell you, as somebody who was in that position, after learning about, and I have one in the shop, learning about one, experiencing one, driving one, it isn't worth it. They might drive nice, they drive pretty nice, they ride pretty nice. There's other vehicles that will do that. Even a Ford Explorer from that era, which is not, the '02 Explorers were not the greatest, but they're going to be better than a Trailblazer is. I mean, it's not even a question, or an Envoy. If you're going to buy, a small SUV, and you want one from the mid to late 2000s, honestly, I wouldn't buy an American one. Because what have you got? The Equinox from Chevy, which is going to be, it's really a gamble with those older ones, if they're going to be good or not. The newer ones aren't. The Ford Escapes are good if you don't live in the Rust Belt. If you do, then I'm sorry, because I love the Escapes, but I don't think I'm going to buy one. It's just too dangerous. Literally, the frames on these cars separate. And I had a coworker who had a Ford Escape who had this happen. Literally, the shock tower moved away from the vehicle, and she was driving around on one wheel, turning, and not even knowing it. It's dangerous how those cars are. And Chrysler, I mean, what do you get, a Jeep Liberty? I wouldn't buy a Jeep Liberty. Not at all. Especially after 2011 or 12. Especially. If you want a small SUV and you need to get 2000s, you'd have to go for a Honda CR-V or something. Unless you want to deal with shit. A whale turd. Which, in that case, you could get a Ford Escape. Well, no. A Ford Escape, I should reiterate it, as a Ford Escape, especially the '08 to 12s, are very good cars. Very good. And that's from a GM guy. They're very good. If you don't live in the Rust Belt. Or if it's undercoated. If it's in the Rust Belt and you've got over 100,000 miles, I would get rid of it. Because the amount of damage that those cars get from rust, I have never seen another car that rusts like the Ford Escapes. My dad had one. He got rid of it right as it was on the cusp of becoming bad. So, I'm going to end this video. I'm sorry I haven't been here. I'm sorry that this video is half an hour long, but I felt like I needed to say something about be careful, especially in this market. Used cars are up crazy. You have to be careful. Excuse me, I'm tired. You have to be careful with what you buy. So with that said, I'm going to leave you with always get a car inspected. And if you live in a state with inspections, you're already at an advantage because most likely the car is probably fine. Another key thing, if you ask an owner if you can take it to a mechanic and they say no, walk away. Because that means that there's probably something wrong with it that they don't want you to find. And I've had that happen before. So, with that said, I hope everyone's been alright. I've been decent. My dad still has the Crosstrek, for those wondering. He's getting his car back at the end of this month. Thought about even just purchasing his car off of him. I don't know. Thank you for watching. Feel free to subscribe and click like if you like what you see, and follow me on the web, wix.com/theelevatorworld/fans. Bye-bye, and I hope to be making more videos soon. See you later, everyone.